The story for today comes from the Reddit user TheCanadianArmy. I'll never camp there again. When I was 22, back in 1985, I decided to go on a camping trip in northern Ontario. Back then, I was finishing up college at the University of Toronto. I had taken a gap year after high school to travel the world, much to the dismay of my parents. I've been very familiar with hiking and backpacking, so going camping to me was very comfortable. It was early fall, and all I wanted was to relax before my last year of college got rolling again. The leaves on the trees had started to change, and I knew it would be perfect for camping. I let my friends and family know where I was going, and I was on my way. The drive wasn't too long. Thankfully, living in Toronto meant that I only had a few hours away from the greatest parks in the world. Parks like Algonquin Provincial Park. I got there in early morning. It was as beautiful as I've been told. I had been camping many places, but I hadn't been there yet. People at school would always tell me that I should head up there, but I never could find the time. I rented a canoe for the 2 days I'd be there, plopped my gear into the boat and started paddling. It started out so well, calming in fact. The water was so smooth that it looked like I was paddling along a mirror. The silence was almost overwhelming. Occasionally I'd hear a loon call, but other than that, nothing else. I paddled until I came onto a portage. It's a point along the river or lake where you have to carry your canoe and gear across the land to get to the next lake. There was 2 people there, a father and his teenage son. I talked with them for a few minutes when I gathered up my things. They mentioned that they were staying at a campsite on the next lake. I said I was staying at the same lake. Something was off about the teen though. He never said a word, just stared at me. He never blinked once. His eyes were green, and he stared at me with such ferocity, it felt like he was staring through my soul. I tried not to look at him. Even just talking to the father, I could feel his gaze. The father introduced him as Johnny, and introduced himself as Frank. I picked up my canoe and said goodbye, walking as fast as I could down the trail. After the portage, it was only another 2 hours of paddling until I got to my campsite. I set up just as I had 100 times before. My tent was at the perfect spot, off on a short cliffside, overlooking the lake. There was a loom floating in the middle. The sight looked so beautiful. In college, I was studying photography. I had a big project coming up, and I knew that if I could have this shot in my portfolio, I could really knock the project out of the park. I reached into my rucksack and felt around for my camera. I pulled it out and started taking shots, one after another, clicking the shutter and rotating the film. After about 10 shots, I figured I had enough. I spun around and took some shots of the camp. I spent the rest of my night lighting a fire, cooking some hot dogs, and taking in the scenery. I'll never forget the way the night sky looked. Clear, not a single cloud in the sky. And since it was so far north, the stars were plentiful. The lake was calm, and with all the stars in the sky, I couldn't tell where the lake started and when the sky began. I could only wish my camera could truly capture its beauty. As my fire began to die down, I began to feel uncomfortable. I felt overwhelmingly uneasy, as if someone had been watching me. I stood up and spun around, my flashlight scanning the outskirts of the camp. I knew something was there, I just knew it. I heard a crack. I spun to my left, and there it was. Just a deer. I sighed in relief. I never felt right after the teenager I saw earlier that day, and I felt worried that he may have been following me somehow. I unzipped my tent and climbed in, making sure to zip up the door behind me. Tired, I climbed into my sleeping bag and fell asleep almost immediately. Paddling really takes up a lot of energy, who knew? I woke up as the sun was coming up over the trees to the east. I got out of my tent, hoping to see the sunrise. I knew I didn't want to miss it. As I climbed out of my tent, something was off. Over to my right, I noticed my camera hanging from a low-hanging branch on a tree. Did I leave it there? I thought I put it back in my bag. Or did I? I was so tired that night, maybe I forgot. I looked around some more, but I didn't notice anything else out of place. Surely, if something was, then my camp would look different, right? I pushed the thought out of my mind. I grabbed my camera and took a couple more shots of the camp. The early morning rays were creating some wonderful lighting. There was no way I wasn't taking more pictures. I made some breakfast and coffee, packed up my things, and I started paddling back out of the park. After going back through the portage and returning the canoe, I started on my drive back to my apartment in Toronto. I was excited to get back. I wanted to develop my pictures I took. I was hoping they came out great. I got home late afternoon, threw my rucksack into my apartment and ran back down the stairs. I knew the school's darkroom was open for only a few hours more, and I wanted to develop the pictures before it closed. I got there only 2 minutes after leaving my apartment. Couldn't wait to see the pictures. The first picture started fading in. It was the shot overlooking the lake. I sighed in relief. It looked gorgeous. The colors of the fall leaves, the calm water, and even the loon made it into the shot. I was so pleased. Everything was perfect. I stared at the picture for a few more minutes, then moved on to the next. More pictures started fading in. First the shots of the campsite, the campfire, the bench, the surrounding trees. Then I stopped. Something was in one of my shots in the background. Poking out from behind the tree, there was a head. It was the boy, Johnny, the one I met at the portage. I felt nauseous. Was that the feeling I had before I went to bed? How long has he been there? I rubbed my eyes, hoping I was seeing things. Maybe I was mistaking natural effects as a head. No, it was still there. The next picture started fading in. It was my tent at night. Camera's flash had lit up the tent and the surrounding ground. When did I take the picture? I don't remember doing this, I said out loud. Then I remembered my camera the next morning hanging up on the tree. I fell to the ground, clutching my chest. My heart was pounding so fast. Damn boy, I thought. He took my camera and watched me. I dreaded developing the last picture. I prayed, hoping the next one would be one of the ones that I took the next morning. The picture started fading in. It felt like an eternity. My anticipation was killing me. Slowly, the picture started taking shape. Slowly, I saw it. I audibly screamed. My nightmare had become reality. For that the picture was me, sleeping in my sleeping bag inside my tent. It felt incredibly uneasy. I vomited on the ground in front of me. The fear I felt was greater than anything I felt before. I gathered up my pictures and ran home to my apartment. I called up the park and immediately started to explain to them what happened. I was frantic, practically screaming on the phone. The ranger on the phone yelled and told me to calm down and slowly explain myself. I told him everything, the trip, the boy, the pictures, everything. I told them that they said they were staying on the same lake, and I told them their names. The ranger told me to hold on while he checked his files, and once back on the phone he said, "Is this some sort of prank?" I was dumbfounded. No, of course not. I was scared and frustrated. How dare he suggest I was lying? This sort of thing isn't funny and it's a waste of my time, frankly, he said. I'm not lying to you, fucker. It's the truth, I screamed on the phone. Whatever, there's no Frank and no Johnny on file here. No one except you was staying on that lake yesterday. No one was staying within miles of you. Goodbye. He hung up the phone. I sat down on my bed, confused and frightened of what just happened. To this day, I refuse to enter the park and warn anyone who dares to enter. The end. This has been Gray Stories. I hope you liked